The discrepancy was $240,000. I found it on a Tuesday morning at 9:14 in the morning, in a file that had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with me, the way a loose thread on a coat has nothing to do with you until you pull it, and then the whole seam comes apart. I want to tell you this story the way it actually happened, which means starting with what I do for a living, because if you do not understand what I do for a living, the rest of it will sound like a coincidence. It was not a coincidence. It was the only outcome that was ever likely to arrive, given the collision of who I am and what my father-in-law believed he had gotten away with. My name is Petra Ashwood. I am 41 years old, and for 14 years, I have been a senior medical billing auditor at an insurance firm called Northgate Insurance Group. My job is to find the things that do not match, billing codes that don't correspond to documented procedures, claim amounts that exceed policy limits, disbursements routed to accounts that were never authorized to receive them, signatures on documents that do not belong where they appear, power of attorney filings used outside the scope of their authorization. I have been doing this work since I was 27 years old, and I am, according to every performance review I have ever received, very good at it. My supervisor describes me as methodical. She means it as the highest compliment her vocabulary offers. I say all of this not to build myself up, but because the only reason this story has the ending it has is that the person Gerald Ashwood chose to defraud happened to know exactly how to read the trail he left. He had no way of knowing that. Neither did I, at the time. But it is the only true thing about the situation, and it matters. My husband Caleb died 26 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. He was 43 years old. He had been a licensed structural engineer at a firm called Holden & Burns, where he had worked for 11 years designing the load-bearing structures of buildings that are going to outlast all of us by decades. He was precise and funny, and had the habit of explaining how things worked to anyone who asked, in a way that made them feel like the explanation was a gift rather than a lecture. He was diagnosed in October. He was gone the following April. In the 6 months between those two dates, I watched the person I had built my life with become someone I had to help hold on to the architecture of himself. And I did it because there was nothing else to do and no one else to do it, and I would do it again without a second of hesitation. He was covered under an employer-provided group life insurance policy. The benefit was $240,000. I never received it. His father, Gerald Ashwood, told me the claim had been denied 2 weeks after the funeral. He came to my house with his wife Rosalind and their daughter Dana, and he sat in my living room and held a cup of tea he didn't drink and said, with the careful gravity of a man delivering news he has already organized, that there had been a problem with the insurance claim. A pre-existing condition in Caleb's medical history that he had not disclosed when he enrolled in the employer's plan. The insurance company had investigated and upheld the denial. Gerald said he was sorry. He said he had tried to appeal it. He handed me a letter, which I took and did not read carefully because I was 25 days from the last morning of Caleb's life, and reading carefully required a continuity of focus that I did not have. I put the letter in the folder I was using for estate paperwork. I thanked Gerald for handling it. I went on surviving. 24 months passed. I went back to work fully in stages. My supervisor gave me the most complex files because she understood that I needed the occupation, that the only room in my brain that could run at full capacity was the one reserved for numbers and documentation. I was grateful for the work. I was grateful for the part of my mind that stayed professional, even when the rest of me was learning, gradually and unevenly, what it meant to rebuild a life around an absence. In February of the second year after Caleb's death, I was assigned an audit involving a group life insurance claim from an engineering firm, not Caleb's firm, a different company in a different city. The file had been flagged by another auditor for a suspected beneficiary redirect using an improperly executed power of attorney. I had worked these cases before. The mechanics vary. Sometimes the POA is forged, sometimes it is legitimate but applied outside its authorized scope, Sometimes it is a combination of both, but the paper trail is always there. Money always leaves a trail if you know how to read it. I had been in the file for 3 weeks when I found the cross-reference. It was in a supplementary routing document, a clearing account record for disbursements processed in the same quarter. The account appeared twice. Once for the case I was auditing, once for a separate disbursement processed 22 months prior that had been routed through the same clearing mechanism. The policy number on the second entry was formatted in a way I recognized. It was not from the firm I was reviewing. I knew the format because I had seen it before, on paperwork I had signed and handed to Gerald in my living room in the weeks after Caleb's diagnosis, when Gerald had offered to manage the administrative burden of the insurance claim submission while I focused on Caleb's care. I ran the policy number in the system. The claim had been processed 22 months earlier, paid in full, $240,000, dispersed to an account listed as Ashwood Family Estate Account, routed to a bank I did not recognize, under a routing number I had never seen. I sat at my desk with my hands flat on the keyboard and did not move for a very long time. What nobody knew, what Gerald had not calculated, was that the person he had defrauded happened to work in the precise professional discipline required to find what he had done. He had handed the paperwork to the one auditor in the building who knew exactly how to read it. Nobody saw it coming from quiet, careful Petra, who works in insurance and never forgets a number. Welcome back. If you've been here before, you know this is a place for stories about the women who do the methodical work and let it arrive where it needs to go. If patient, careful justice is your kind of story, stay. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Subscribe if you haven't. This one goes somewhere, and you will want to have been here for all of it. Let me back up. I met Caleb Ashwood at a professional conference 12 years before he died. He was presenting a structural engineering paper on load assessments for mid-century industrial buildings being converted to residential use, and I was attending a seminar on insurance compliance in the construction sector, because they occasionally overlapped in our respective professional worlds. We met at the coffee station outside the conference hall. He was holding a cup of coffee he had not yet drunk from and reading the program notes with the focused concentration of someone who had not thought about anything except his presentation for 3 days. I asked him if the coffee was good. He said he genuinely could not tell, because he had been operating on adrenaline since Tuesday, and his ability to distinguish flavors had temporarily shut down. We talked for 45 minutes. We were both late for our next sessions. We got married 2.5 years later. Caleb's family operated on a different frequency from mine. My family was loud in its affections, complicated, sometimes overwhelming, but transparent. You always knew where you stood with my family because they would tell you, immediately, without being asked. The Ashwood family ran on a different system. Gerald and Rosalind Ashwood were gracious in a formal way that I had initially interpreted as reserved warmth. The formality was genuine. The warmth was there, but it was conditional, in ways that took me several years of marriage to fully map. Gerald Ashwood was a retired civil engineer. He was methodical, precise, and had held views about most things before you had finished explaining your position on any of them. He believed in the management of resources, financial, informational, relational, with an efficiency that left no room for sentiment when sentiment and efficiency pointed in different directions. He was generous with Caleb up to a point, and that point was where Caleb's choices diverged from Gerald's expectations, at which place Gerald would go very quiet, in a way that communicated disappointed without employing the word. I had watched this pattern for a decade and understood it, and understood that Gerald's generosity was always partly an investment in his own version of what things should look like. Rosalind was sharper than she appeared in Gerald's shadow. She had a warmth that Gerald could not reach, and a loyalty to the structure of her marriage that she had maintained for 40 years and would not rearrange for anyone, including her children. I did not hold this against her. People build what they can in the structures available to them. Caleb's sister Dana was 5 years younger. She had her father's precision and her mother's reserve, and had found a version of peace with both of them that I suspected cost more than she let on. She had married a kind, steady man named Pete Kroll, and they lived 2 hours away and came to family gatherings with reliable good nature. Dana and I had never been close in the way of people who seek each other out, but we had always been honest with each other, which in the Ashwood family was its own distinct form of intimacy. When Caleb was diagnosed, the family reorganized itself around his care in ways that I now understand more fully than I did at the time. Gerald took charge of the paperwork. He always took charge of paperwork. It was the domain where he was most comfortable and most certain, and I let him, because I was occupied with Caleb's medical decisions and could not manage both. Gerald arranged the power of attorney. He said it was standard for situations like this, that it would allow him to manage insurance communications and billing administration on Caleb's behalf, while Caleb was too weak to deal with it himself. Caleb signed it in the hospital, in the 3rd week of his 2nd hospitalization, on a morning when I was there, and did not read the document as carefully as I should have, because I had not yet understood that careful reading was the thing most required of me in that room. The power of attorney authorized Gerald to manage Caleb's medical billing, insurance claim submissions, and account management related to ongoing medical expenses. I know this because I read it later. It did not authorize the redirection of a life insurance death benefit to a third-party account. I know this because I read it very carefully, twice, 24 months after Caleb's death, with a copy of the relevant case law open on my second monitor. Caleb's last anniversary card arrived in the form of a plain envelope Dana brought to the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before he died. He had asked her to bring him cards and a pen because he said he was not going to let the anniversary go unmarked. The card had a garden on the front. He said he picked it because it looked like the view from our kitchen window in the morning when the light came in at a low angle. Inside, in the handwriting that was still Caleb's even when his hands were less steady, he had written, "Whatever comes next, know that I took care of what I could. Love always, C." I kept that card in my bedside drawer for 26 months. I read it more times than I tracked. I had never been sure exactly what he meant. Caleb was a structural engineer by training and temperament. He prepared for contingencies the way other people keep extra batteries in a drawer. I assumed the note referred to the practical arrangements. The will, the small savings account he had organized without telling me, the contact list he had updated and printed and put in the filing cabinet in his home office with a note that said, in his clear block handwriting, "In case I can't explain it." I found all of those things after he died and was moved, and grateful for each of them. Sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning with his policy number on my screen, I thought about the card again. I did not know whether Caleb had known what his father might do. I could not know that, and I will not know it, and I have made a certain peace with not knowing it. But I thought about it. I think about it still. I closed the file on my screen, and I went to lunch. I ate a sandwich at the break room table and drank a glass of water and sat in the kind of stillness that comes before a decision you have already made but not yet named. I thought about Gerald in my living room with the cup of tea he did not drink. I thought about the letter he had handed me. I thought about the 25 days I had been out from burying my husband and what my capacity for careful reading had been in that period. I thought about what it would mean to be wrong about what I had found. I thought about what it would mean to be right. I went back to my desk and called my attorney. Her name was Mara Osei. She was an estate and insurance law attorney I had retained briefly after Caleb's death to manage the will documentation, and we had stayed in occasional professional contact in the years since. She was precise, unhurried, and had the specific quality of calm I had come to associate with people who had spent years working with the worst possible versions of situations and had learned to address them without dramatizing them. I told her what I had found. I read her the policy number, the disbursement date, the account name, the routing number. She asked me 3 clarifying questions. Then she said, "Give me 48 hours. I am going to pull the POA documentation and the original claim records. She called back in 36 hours. She had the power of attorney. She had the claim file. The POA's authorization language was clear. Medical billing, claim submissions, and account management related to ongoing medical expenses. The redirection of a death benefit was not within its scope. Gerald had used language in the document to authorize an action the document did not authorize. He had, additionally, forged a denial letter to present to me. The letter he had handed me in my living room was not from the insurance company. The claim had never been denied. It had been processed and paid and redirected before I had been told anything about it. Mara said, "This is a recoverable claim. Full amount. Statutory interest. Legal fees." I asked how she wanted to proceed. She said she would send Gerald a demand letter first. Civil, clear, giving him the opportunity to resolve it without litigation. If he responded appropriately, the matter could settle quietly. If he did not, she would file with the county. I told her to send the letter. The letter went out on a Friday morning. By Saturday evening, Gerald had called Dana. I did not know this until Sunday afternoon, when Dana called me. "Petra," she said. "Dana." A pause. I could hear her choosing where to start. "He called me last night. He told me there was a letter from an attorney." "Yes." "He told me it was about Caleb's insurance." "Yes." Another pause. Dana had her father's precision, which meant she was assembling the facts in the order she needed to arrive at the conclusion herself before she spoke it. I let her do it. I owed her that much. "He told us the policy was voided," she said. "After Caleb died, he told all of us. He showed Mom and me the letter." "The letter was not from the insurance company," I said. I said it as directly as I could. She deserved directness. The silence that followed was the longest of any silence we had shared in 11 years of being family. "He forged a letter," she said, not a question. "Yes," I heard her breathe. She was putting it together, the letter, the account, the years since Caleb's death, the money that had gone somewhere that was not my account or my knowledge. She was doing what I had done on a Tuesday morning, finding the place where the things stopped matching. "What do you need from me?" she said. I told her I did not need anything from her. I told her the legal process was already in motion. I told her that whatever happened within her family in the wake of this was between her and them, and I was not asking her to make a choice on my behalf. I told her the only thing I needed was for her to know the truth. She said, "Your family. You've always been family." She said it the way someone says a thing they should have said more often, in a register that acknowledged the inadequacy of saying it now, and I appreciated her for knowing that. "I know," I said. Gerald's attorney responded to Mara's demand letter within 2 weeks. He raised the question of POA scope interpretation and suggested Gerald had acted in good faith based on a broad reading of the authorization language. Mara's response was 12 pages long. It documented the specific authorization language, the relevant case law on POA scope in insurance disbursements in our state, the routing records demonstrating the transfer, and the forensic analysis of the forged denial letter. Gerald's attorney did not respond for 10 days. When he did, he indicated that his client was prepared to discuss resolution. They settled 14 weeks after I found the file. Full disbursement, $240,000, plus accrued interest, plus Mara's legal fees. The funds arrived in the account Mara had established for the purpose 3 days after the settlement was signed. I sat with the number on the screen for a while, the way you sit with things that arrive too late to be what you needed them to be at the time, but are still the thing that was owed. This was Caleb's money. He had earned it. It had been set aside as a provision for the life we were going to keep building after the life we were building ended. It arrived 24 months after it should have arrived, and by then, it was a different kind of resource. Not a thing I could spend the way we would have spent it together. A thing I could use correctly, which is not the same as joyfully, but which is still something. Gerald did not contact me. His attorney sent the settlement paperwork through Mara's office, and I signed it, and that was the complete extent of our communication. I expect that it will remain so. Rosalind called me once, 3 weeks after the settlement. It was a short call, composed and careful, the way Rosalind was always composed and careful. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known. And I believe she had not known the full specifics, though I believe she had known something was wrong, and had chosen the structure of her marriage over the question. Those two things are both true, and neither of them cancels the other. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her I wished things had been different. There have not been further calls. Dana and I have dinner when she is in the city, which is 4 or 5 times a year now. We talk about things that matter, and things that don't, the way people do when they are finding the path back to each other through a landscape that has been significantly rearranged. It takes time. We have time. In September, I established the Caleb Ashwood Patient Comfort Fund at the hospital where Caleb had spent the final weeks of his life. $20,000, the first contribution. The fund covers practical comforts for long-term patients and their families, meal vouchers for the cafeteria, parking passes, blankets for the family waiting rooms, the kind of small, material comfort that does not feel small when you are spending your 3rd week in a plastic chair in a hospital corridor. Caleb would have wanted something concrete. He was a structural engineer. He believed in things you could measure and touch and stand on. There is a small plaque in the 3rd floor waiting room. His name is on it. He is on something in the building where he spent the last weeks of his life, and the thing his name is on does something useful every day. That felt right. It still does. The anniversary card is in my bedside drawer. Whatever comes next, know that I took care of what I could. I have decided to understand it the way it needs to be understood, which is, he did what he could with the provisions available to him. He could not have known what his father was going to do. He could not have protected against it directly. But he had spent 14 years building me into the professional I am. He had been proud of my work in a way that was specific and detailed and not general. He had asked me about cases, understood the mechanics, told his colleagues what I did with the precision of someone who actually understood it. He had built me, in the ways a life does, into the person who could read the thing that was left unread. That is not a plan, but it is a kind of love that I know how to hold. That is my story. What I want to leave you with is this. The records are always there. They do not disappear. They accumulate in systems that were designed to preserve them, and they wait for the person who knows how to read them. You may not always be that person in your own story, in your own crisis, at the moment when you most need to be. Grief is not a good condition for careful reading, but you can become the person who reads carefully, one file at a time, 1 year at a time, until the day the thing that was taken from you shows up in a file that had nothing to do with you at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. Take this as your sign that the work you do, the careful, methodical, unglamorous work of knowing your field, is sometimes the most powerful thing you own. The people who underestimate you assume your work is paperwork. They stop watching the paperwork. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment. Tell me where you are listening from. I will read it. I read everything carefully. It is what I do. I want to tell you about the first year after Caleb died, because it is the context in which Gerald's plan worked, and you need to understand the context to understand why no one questioned it. Grief is not a condition that invites scrutiny of the people who are trying to help you. It is a condition that narrows your available attention to the things immediately in front of you. The next meal, the next phone call, the next thing that must be done, or the consequences will compound. Gerald was very helpful in that first year. He made calls I could not make. He organized paperwork I could not organize. He coordinated with the estate attorney, and the funeral home, and the employer, and the pension administrator, and the health insurance continuation plan. He took the pile of things that had to be managed and managed them. I was grateful. I expressed that gratitude explicitly and often because it was genuine. I did not think about the life insurance again for months after Gerald told me the claim had been denied. I thought about it occasionally, in the same way I thought about other things that would have been different if Caleb had not died, in the register of practical losses that accumulated alongside the larger one. $240,000 was not a sum that would have changed my life completely, but it would have changed the texture of the years immediately after. It would have allowed me to take more time before returning to work, to breathe a little more slowly, to make some decisions from a position of less pressure. I thought about this sometimes, and then I stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it did not change anything, and I had enough to manage. The second year was the year I rebuilt the working part of myself. I took the most complex files. I stayed later than I needed to. I found, to my relief, that the auditing brain, the part that reads for discrepancy, that holds the pattern in mind while checking the detail, that refuses to move to the next page until the numbers on the current one make sense, had survived intact. This was the part of myself that felt most reliably like myself, and I treated it with care. I gave it difficult work. It performed. In January of the second year, I was assigned the engineering firm audit. I was told it was a complex file, that it had some unusual features in the disbursement records, and that the prior auditor had flagged it without being able to fully resolve the flag. I said I would take it. I spent 3 weeks in that file before I found the cross-reference. I want to describe that 3-week period because it matters. These were 3 weeks of ordinary work, pulling records, running comparisons, tracing account numbers through clearing systems, documenting everything in the standardized format we used for audit records. There was nothing extraordinary about it. This was what I did every day. The only difference was the routing document and the policy number it contained. When I ran the number and it returned the result it returned, I was very still for a long time. I have been trying to describe what that stillness was like for 26 months, and I am still not entirely sure. It was not shock, exactly, because the part of my brain that finds discrepancies had been moving toward something since I opened the file, and this was simply where it had arrived. But it was the arrival at a conclusion that reorganized the entire preceding 2 years, and that reorganization happened all at once, in a Tuesday morning at 9:14, and the scale of it took time to settle. I thought about the living room. Gerald with the cup of tea he didn't drink. The way he had held the letter he handed me, not nervously, not with any evidence of guilt, but with the particular gravity of a man who is very good at performing solemnity. He had practiced this. Or he had not needed to practice it, which was more frightening, because it meant that the performance was genuinely who he was. I thought about Caleb who had trusted his father enough to grant him power of attorney during the most frightening period of his life. Caleb, who had believed the document was for managing his medical bills and had signed it on a morning when I was there and watching and equally unaware of what was being signed. Caleb, who had written, in his last anniversary card, that he had taken care of what he could. I could not know what Caleb had known, but I could feel the shape of the thing, sitting at my desk with the routing document on my screen, and the shape was this. He had known, in some part of himself, that his father was capable of the kind of decision that put his own interests first. He had not been able to say it directly. Families don't say these things directly, not to the people who know them too well to hear it without defensiveness, but he had left behind a wife who could read paperwork, and maybe that was the best he could do, and maybe that was enough. I went to lunch. I ate without tasting anything. I came back, and I called Mara. The period between Mara's demand letter and the settlement was 14 weeks, and I want to tell you about those 14 weeks because they were their own kind of experience. I had expected relief. I had expected something like justice arriving in a concrete form, a number on a screen, a confirmation of receipt, the clean resolution of a wrong that had sat unresolved for over 2 years. What I felt instead was something more complex than relief, and less satisfying than I had imagined, and more true than I felt the specifics of what had been taken, Not the money, or not only the money. What had been taken was the period after Caleb's death, when I had believed I was seeing clearly, believed I was being helped, believed that Gerald's involvement in the estate administration was an act of generosity. That period existed, and I had lived through it, and I could not unlive it. I had been grateful to the man who had deceived me, and I had expressed that gratitude, and I could not unfeel the gratitude I had felt at the time, because the gratitude had been real. The situation had produced a genuine response in me, and the situation had been constructed by someone who knew what response it would produce. What I felt, in those 14 weeks, was the slow work of separating those things from each other. Grief from deception, gratitude from manipulation, my trust from the thing it had been placed in. These are not clean separations. They do not complete on a schedule. But the work of making them is the work you have to do, and I did it, alongside my regular files and my regular Tuesday lunches, and the gradual, strange experience of learning to live in a house that no longer had Caleb in it and now had this knowledge in it instead. Dana called twice during those 14 weeks. She did not ask me about the legal process. She asked me about other things, how work was going, whether I had gotten my car serviced, whether the plant on my kitchen windowsill was still alive. The plant was still alive. I told her so. She said she was glad. We talked about her children, about a trip she and Pete were planning, about a book she had read and thought I would like. We did not talk about Gerald. We did not need to. What we were doing was practicing the version of the relationship that would exist once the legal matter was finished and the landscape had resettled, and the practice was its own kind of preparation. The settlement came through on a Thursday morning. Mara's paralegal called to confirm the wire, and I said thank you, and I went back to the audit I was working on. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop and looked at the account balance and let it be what it was. The next morning, I called Mara and asked her about the process for establishing a named fund at a hospital. The Caleb Ashwood Patient Comfort Fund was established in September. The hospital's development office helped me select the focus, practical comfort items for long-term patients and their families, and suggested the placement of the plaque in the third-floor waiting room, which was the floor where the oncology unit was located. I agreed. The plaque is there. His name is on something in that building. I visit it sometimes, when I am in that part of the city, which is less often now than in the first year. I stand in the waiting room for a few minutes, and then I leave. It is enough.